Good morning, Tim. We have an old friend with us
Hey
today.
there, Fred. Hi,
Mr.
Matt. Good
Matt
to see you.
has joined
Tim,
us.
Fred, glad to be here.
Okay. Um, I guess what we really need to talk about, the name of the channel is Markets and Madness. We've been talking about markets for the first few times. The last few episodes talked about some of the madness that we've all
Yeah.
encountered. And
Let
Matt,
me
you
let me jump in here.
as well.
Maddie was there for the mouse market. Do you remember that,
Oh,
Maddie?
yeah.
We did a thing on the mouse market the other day, and I can remember. I told Freddie later. Once it was inside the brokerage shop, it was contained. It was when it leaked out into the market generally that it got totally out of control. We used to deal a dollar against the market. People would say dollar mark, dollar mark. People would call up going dollar mouse was small, dollar.
Yeah, but you did that with Snow. We did that with Dave King. You must remember the Dave Kingman home runs,
Yes,
and I mean Stanley Cup goals.
Stanley
Stanley
Cup.
Cup goals was
Stanley Cup
wins,
was,
amazing.
Yankee
yeah.
wins, Snow wins,
Yankee wins,
Stanley Cup.
Even
Absolutely.
Lou Brock. There were Lou Brock homers. There's the
you
name.
know.
Somebody,
I,
That's
I
true.
I
John
remember
Hazelton
years
was
ago.
reaching out to me about peach pits. Make me a price on 20 pounds of peach pits. It's like, and then I
What
realized he lived next to an orchard, and he would go in the yard.
was a similar story with John Noonan, who had a lemon tree in his backyard, and he started a market on the coast on lemons for delivery, and they were delivering lemons to one another.
I guess I was working at Noonan's a few months. Stanley Cup starts. Anthony Contarino, Hondo. You remember Hondo? Hondo yells out to Tony Shimetta, price on Stanley Cup goals, $10 or whatever. So Tony looks at around, asks a couple of people. He makes him a price. Tony gets hit. No, no, Tony gets paid. He's short goals. He doesn't think anything about it. So the Stanley Cup ends, and like let's just say he was short at 290, and there was like 330 goals scored, right? And he thought he just lost $10. Somebody called up.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna mention who it was. I know I'm not gonna mention who it was. Person calls up and says, "Can I come and get my money? I'll come over for lunch. I'll come and get my money." And Tony says, "Yeah, come get my money." Sure. He gets off the phone. He turns around to Hondo and goes, "Hondo, what's the matter with this guy? He's coming over to get $10." Oh, Shap, I guess I didn't explain to you. What? You're short 40 goals at $10 a goal. Everybody started writing out
400
shits,
bucks.
$25 drinks with Fred Scala, drinks with Tim Scala. The guy shows up, he goes, "Where's my money? Here's your money, get the hell out of here." And I'll never get how Tony ripped the crap out of Hondo for that one.
The Yom Kippur War. Guy at Security Pacific. His first name was Mir, and he calls me up. He wants a price in 1974 when the war breaks out. Now I thought it was a little ghoulish to
Right.
make a price on, but this was one of my best customers. Was Mir.
Me and him, yeah.
So so I know he was a seller because the previous war was a 6 day war. And Mir's call, and I had spoken to him, so I said, this guy's a seller. I can make him a price. I made him like 13, 14. Less war went 6 days. So he hits me, and he hits me for like $10 or maybe more. I don't remember. But I remember that the end bet was pretty big. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm long it was $100 a day. That's what it was. I said, because my downside risk is $1,300 if the war ends now.
Right.
But my upside, who knows how long a war? You get caught short the Crusades, you could impoverish your lineage. I mean, all your ancestors will be broke. You short the Hundred Years' War or something like that. Guys making markets on the Crusades must have lost shirts. So Herbie Hoffman in London takes me out at 42 or 44, and that happened to be the break even because I was sweating it. Like
Yeah.
how am I going to collect from here? There's no way. And God knows if he did another side to it, and that's where we're at. But Snow actually had a settlement day. We used to
Yeah.
have a settlement day for Snow.
It
It
was
was
well, it was the 30th of for the
March
yearly one. It
31st.
was wasn't it October 1st to March 30th? But then somebody came up with making month snow. Like what's January snow?
Right.
but
And the
Things like that.
Eddie,
Yeah.
Eddie,
and there was
Eddie was
weekend
like
stuff.
Frank Fields. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, the markets. You were making a point earlier, Maddie, about people not talking about the election. I've had this conversation with a couple of people in the market, but we're not in the wholesale markets anymore. We don't
Right.
really feel what's going on. There might be all kinds of conversations. We only know what we read, basically, and the handful of people we talk to. But I made the point that the tax position between the two candidates are enormously different.
Right.
You know, she's talking about hiking the capital gains tax like 25%, from 21 to 28%. You know, that's a big deal. Of course, the other issue is where's the Senate go and where's the House? So the presidential election alone is not really enough to drive this, although the markets seem to feel, and they're trading as if Trump is going to get elected because
I've been talking about this for a while. I don't, and I'm not trying to disparage Kamala Harris or Donald Trump either way. I don't really think the presidential election is as important right now as the senatorial and the congressional elections. I think what's going to end up happening is one way or the other, you're going to get a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, or you're going to get a Republican president and a Democratic Congress. So once again, nothing's going to happen. I just don't see either candidate mending fences, if that's the right word to use. I mean, what happened? Within 10 years, it's where we grew up together, basically. What happened from when you grew up in high school? You were taught, all right, as a presidential election, if your guy loses, what do? You work hard for the next 4 years to make sure your guy wins. Nowadays, if your guy loses, if I say I like Joe and you say I like Tom, we start arguing with each other. We curse each other out. We don't talk to each other. How many friendships have you lost in the last 5 years over, nobody pays attention anymore. I hate to say it that way, but you can't have an opinion different than somebody else, or else,
We speak about Reagan and Tip O'Neill. And I remember there was a senator, Evan Bayh, I think his name was, from Indiana, and he took over his father's Senate seat, and it must have been 15 years ago he resigned from the Senate, and he said, there's nothing I can do here. He was a Democrat. He says, there's nothing I can do here because there's so much gridlock. He said, when my father was in the Senate, we'd have the other side of the aisle over for dinner all the time. For holidays, they'd have us over, and then they'd go on the floor and they'd debate and they'd argue professional arguments, and then they'd walk back away. Now, you're poison.
Not there. But did you see the movie? I don't know if you saw the movie Reagan, but in the movie Reagan, they obviously, Dennis Quaid plays Ronald Reagan, and I'm trying to remember. I think it was the guy from Courtship of Eddie's, not Courtship of Eddie's father, the guy from The Wonder Years who played the father. He plays Tip O'Neill. And, they talk about it, and don't forget, we're going to argue, but 5 o'clock we're having a beer. That type of thing.
Well, the difference now, my father used to say, don't talk to people about politics or religion. And if he were alive today, I would say, Dad, it's the same thing. People have now taken their politics as if they're religious beliefs. If you believe, Maddie, that your God said that 2 + 2 = 11, if you believe that, you read it, and then I show up and try to convince you it's 4, I should save my coffee. I'm not going to convince you because you bought this on faith. Math does not matter. And people have bought their politics on faith today. And when you challenge their faith, political faith, you're challenging their religion. And they will not accept the challenge.
And when did that start?
I agree.
When did the difference?
The Clinton years, I would say.
What did you say, Tim?
The Clinton years.
And you and I have argued about this many times. I have blamed Newt Gingrich for the government shutdown and having a hard stance against Clinton, and you always said he was forced to do that, right?
Well, who shut down the government? The president or the Speaker of the House? Because when you hear it the other way, Reagan shut down the government. Well, okay, it wasn't the Speaker of the House then. Tip O'Neill had nothing to do with it, I suppose, right? so you hear it, it's in the eye of the beholder. The Gingrich years were different. Gingrich is very much, to me, Gingrich is one of the smartest guys in Washington. I watched him in the 90s, and he had just become Speaker. And there was a bunch of college students. I was watching C-SPAN, and he was talking to these college students, and he said, look, while you're here, I'd like you to go and visit some of these offices. You'll see people, they're good people enough to work on old computers. He said, if a third of them weren't there, you'd never even notice. And the other thing that's going to be most important in your lifetime is maps. When you see maps, I remember looking at this, it was around 1992, I guess. And he said, you know those lines at the bottom of the maps? They're called borders. We got a lot of people here that don't believe we should have any of them. And that's going to be one of the most important issues in your lifetime. And that was like 30 years ago. And he was dead right.
It all goes back to John Lennon's Imagine. Imagine there's no country.
Oh, yeah, we're living in Imagine right now, yeah.
And people
Yeah, well,
believe
I talk about it. I mean, I've told my students for years, laugh about it, shout about it. When you got to lose, either way you look at it, you lose. I mean, that was Simon and Garfunkel 50 years ago with Mrs.
Oh, Mickey Old Boss, same as the new boss.
Yeah, I mean, but back then, I don't know, there was civility. Is that the right word?
I read something the other day that to this point, and they said what's different about this administration is cabinets and cabinet members and individual organizations like the Energy Department, the various departments, they all had their own sphere, and they lived inside their silos, and that was really a checks and balances, like a kind of a holistic checks and balances kind of an operation. But in this administration, everybody's expected to pursue the same agenda. So you got the Energy Department, the Secretary of Energy, she's pursuing this equity agenda. And you've got the Justice Department, who you look at what they're doing with the elections, so in Virginia and whatever. I mean, it's egregious, but it's happening. All of them now have been given marching orders. The Homeland Security guy, Mayorkas, I mean, he won't even answer a question.
Right.
He's being held. He's being held in contempt. He doesn't care.
Well, none of them answer questions. I mean, they don't. I mean, the whole the hysterical part of the whole debate was, and I'm not picking a candidate, and I'm not picking what's 2 + 2. Well, my favorite color is blue. Well, that's very nice, but what's 2 + 2? Well, if I can't find blue, I'll get green. And then the moderators move away, and look, we all know the newspapers, media, television media, radio media. CNN is liberal, Fox is conservative, the New York Times is liberal, the New York Post is conservative. If you manage to, the debates could have easily been done and made a lot more sense. Pick a liberal moderator, pick a conservative moderator, have the two of them get together, decide what questions you're going to ask, and just make sure that you hold the candidates accountable to answering the questions.
Why do you need moderators?
Well, you need somebody to ask the question.
No, you don't. No, you don't. I mean, if you and I had a debate, I could give you 2 minutes and you can give me 2 minutes. I'll ask you a question and then you ask me a question. So, I mean, the candidates should be the ones asking the questions, not the moderators.
Well,
I prefer to see an hour discussing healthcare, and next week come back and we'll have an hour and we'll discuss immigration, and then next week we'll have an hour and we'll discuss the tax plan.
Probably a better way, but I would do it without moderators.
Yeah, well,
I mean, either way would work. But the fact of the matter is, nobody answers the questions.
yeah. But,
I mean, I graduated college with a speech and theater degree, and one of the things we learned was, obviously grading debates. The only person in the last presidential debate, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, the only person that gained any points in that debate was actually Kamala Harris for walking across the stage and shaking his hand. Why no one explained to Donald Trump that he's supposed to meet her in the middle and shake her hand, I can't get over that. Now,
But he didn't spit at her.
well, okay, but if somebody told him that and he didn't listen, well, that's on him.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter, and again, forget about political preference, one or the other. Just watching it, walking across the stage and said, "Hi, I'm Kamala Harris." She made him look like an idiot.
Well, she won on style, no doubt.
And I
But
mean,
I thought he was more substantive. I mean, he really tried to answer the questions.
but he missed a lot of things. All he had to do, I
Absolutely,
mean,
he
if
did.
he's going to argue about certain points, if you argue the facts, nobody cares that my rally was bigger than your rally. Nobody
Yeah.
argue the
He was.
facts. What
well,
was
that's
the
what I think
economy
is
like?
the point of the VP debate.
I was just going to raise that. Fast.
Well, that was more substantive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really was.
Did you see what he did the other day when he did with
Which
Woman fell.
Yeah, he said no. He said, "Do you hear yourself? Do you hear yourself? You're okay with the Venezuelan gangs taking over just a handful of apartments? That's all right." He's sharp. He's pretty
I
sharp.
got to tell you something. I don't know that the border is going to get fixed, regardless of who wins this election in our lifetimes. I really think, um, I have my own opinions about what's going on in the government right now. People think I've told this people they think I'm crazy. Maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist. We're living through one of the greatest coups of our time. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, the fact that you went to the sitting president and basically told him that you cannot run again, and then basically told him if you don't announce that you're not running, we're going to initiate Article 25. We're going to get the cabinet to go against you. We're going to resign. What should have happened, and this is my conspiracy theory, and tell me if I'm crazy. When Joe Biden decided he wasn't running for re-election in 2024, he should have resigned the presidency. Kamala Harris should have became the president. Why they didn't do that, in my opinion, is very simple. If Kamala Harris became the president 8 weeks ago, she would have had to be the president, and she wouldn't have been able to be out campaigning. She campaign, incumbent presidents campaign, but they don't work nearly as hard as the ones that are running outside the office because they've got a job to do. And that's why I think, now you read theories that he's trying to undermine her candidacy because he's pissed. Well,
What do you think, Fred? Is he right?
I, you know, the whole situation was strange. The fact that he was cognizant, aware, everything was fine on Sunday, and then Monday, no, I'm sorry, he's not well enough to run. What happened? There's so many conspiracy theories that have come true over the years that I don't believe anything's a conspiracy theory anymore. I just look at what's gone on over the last 8 weeks, two assassination attempts that people have downplayed.
and then there was a third one almost that they found a third guy in this last
The
weekend.
guy says, I was a Trump supporter. He says,
Yeah, well, that's different.
He says,
Maybe he got pissed at it.
he claims to have had legal credentials, and he was invited. That's
Yeah, but he had seven different credentials. He had passports with
Yeah,
all kinds of
passport
different
all over the
names.
place, yeah.
No, I got multiple personalities. That's why I have all these passports. I'm
Well,
really
that-
all these people.
Well, then I'll ask the two of you a question. November 5th, Kamala Harris gets elected. Is it peaceful? November 5th, Donald Trump gets elected. Is it peaceful?
Yes and no.
Just
Yes
go
to
back
the
and look
first,
at
no to the
history.
second.
Just go back and look at history.
If Trump gets elected, they're not going to accept that election very easily. I mean, they tried to impeach him before he was
Well, he'll be impeached
inaugurated.
before he gets inaugurated, but that's
Yeah.
besides the point. But if she gets elected, I mean, people talk about middle America and things of that nature. And, well, Fred, you're down in South Carolina now, right? All right. And Tim, you're in Florida. I'm in Tennessee. I finally found last week during one of my walks Harris Walls poster. I hadn't seen one in Tennessee. Now, I was told by friends, oh, well, you're moving to a red state. You moving to a red state. Well, I lived all these years in a blue state. I'm a Republican, so I moved to a red state. I don't mind having a Republican governor. I don't mind having Republican senators. I'm a Republican. I lived in Jersey. I was a minority. But I worry about him losing. I don't worry about him winning because I don't see the other side creating riots, if you will.
Oh, I do.
But this goes
But
back
the
to
thing
the
is, if they do create the riots like we had in Minneapolis and Portland and all of those things, see, he becomes president. Say he gets elected president on November 5th. He still has they still have 2.5 months to riot until he can put a stop to it on January 20th.
It goes back to the first thing you said. If it's a Republican president and a Democratic House and Senate, it offsets. If it's a Democratic
Hopefully.
Senate, Republican House and Senate, it offsets. I don't think you're going to see.
Look,
Seen.
we're dealing with people who are not interested in the rules. If I had to describe in a phrase what I see now, and this is probably true of both parties, but more true of the Democratic Party, the end justifies the means. We're not really interested in the Constitution or the rules. You've got sanctuary cities, sanctuary states ignoring immigration laws. You have various states ignoring federal drug laws. You have really chaos in every direction. We ignore the immigration laws. We have Biden tried to give back or have a taxpayer deal with student loans. The Supreme Court says no. He's still trying to do it.
Yeah, no.
The rule book doesn't exist anymore, and I think that's the problem here. Gold should be $11,000 an ounce because what we really have here now is an undermining of the very fabric that made this country, the rule of law. We don't really have a rule of law. And I think the bigger argument that we should be talking about here is whether or not the dollar deserves a reserve status and whether or not people should be buying U.S. treasuries. Because we for all intents and purposes, we don't have a government anymore. We have this gridlocked set of people that can't get together on any issue at all, right? And major issues. We have the Justice Department being used to put political enemies in jail. We basically have an enemies list. If you fly out of this and look down at 50,000 feet, we're looking at chaos here. And why would you buy government securities in a third world country?
And yet, what happened? Middle East flares up, you buy the dollar. It still is the safe haven. It still remains the reserve. I agree with everything you said. To refer to the United States government as chaotic almost sounds blasphemous to say it, but it is right now, and that's not going to change, regardless who gets elected. All right, I don't see you can yell and scream about term limits and all that other stuff like that. We've gotten too old as a country, and I cannot believe. I have nothing against Donald Trump. I really don't. I have nothing against Kamala Harris. I'll make my decision who I think will be best to lead the country. But when Joe Biden was running against Donald Trump, didn't it bother you even just the slightest bit that we can't find somebody younger that would be a more dynamic character to lead our country?
To that point, Tim and I discussed this a couple of weeks ago. On the way down, I listened to the Vivek Lex Freedman podcast. It's about 3 hours long.
Right.
And Vivek, to me, is the future of the conservative movement. He is very eloquent. He's very intelligent. And Lex was anti-Trump. He's on the left. And he kept saying, what's the fault? What faults do you see in Donald Trump? And he said, and he's trying to be nice about it. He says, Trump learned a lot from his first term. He learned a lot in these past 4 years. Yeah, but what's the fault? What's the biggest drawback? He says, the biggest drawback? He said, when it was Trump against Biden, they were both 75 years old. They both shouldn't have been running. And he says, now, if you tell me what's the biggest drawback? He says, the biggest drawback is Trump's age. But I look at Vance and Vivek as the future of the conservative movement going forward,
Well, I mean, then you get Harris, who was she, 59 years old, so she's considered a young person. Obviously, Joe Biden had some
I'm just going to
cognitive problems.
Just to go back again. So Friedman asks Vivek, he says, I'd love to see you. He says, you're very eloquent. You're very strong on the facts. You enunciate your point very, very well. I'd love to see you debate Tim Walz. And I thought, that's interesting. Walz didn't really hold up well in the last debate.
Yeah.
Oh, he's a target-rich environment.
So Lex said to him, do you see anybody else from the other side of the aisle that you think would make a good debate partner? And he thought about it, and he said, Fetterman seems to be an eloquent guy. Fetterman seems to have gone. I thought, think about where we were with Fetterman 3 years ago, right? When he first ran, was it 2 years ago? And now he's become like considered a standard bearer for the Democratic Party. He has some
I mean,
reason for it.
he does speak well. He doesn't look well, but he does speak well.
Yeah, but he's
No,
eloquent. He's realizing that everything is not. There is gray in this world. It's not always black and white.
no, and it isn't. But again,
But politics has
look at
become black and white. There's no gray. I used to live next to a woman who was Singaporean, and she was very dogmatic about this is the way. This is the way. She was arguing with the contractors, and she said, "But you have to follow this code." He said, "But if I follow that code, it's gonna create a problem with that code. I don't care. We'll deal with that later. You have to follow this one." And I spoke to her husband. He says, "You see, my wife, everything is either very black or very white. There's no middle of the road." And that's what
That was
we
Joe
see in
Roderick.
politics now.
That was Joe Roderick.
you know,
I used to call it didactic.
We've
Yeah.
gone almost 30 minutes, and I appreciate you both coming in. I think we've had a spirited discussion, talked about a lot of good things. In terms of the markets, I think we still believe stocks go up, stocks go down, not a lot of direction. I'm still a big fan of the inflation trade going into next year and beyond. I'm still a big
Yeah.
fan of holding gold for next year and beyond, but, we still got a lot more to discuss.
I think one thing that we should point out, I guess, is crude oil dropped 5% today
yeah.
because it looks like there was a deal to Bibi Netanyahu. It looks like Bibi got these THAAD missiles and he's agreed not to hit the Iranian oil infrastructure to satisfy Biden because he doesn't want to see oil prices spike before the election. That's my read on it. I did see an article later in the day, this morning, that said Bibi denied that. But the market, it's probably bullshit because the market didn't respond to it at all. Oil was still down. I looked at that and I expected to see oil.
It's not. I'm sure for a fact, and he's not going to admit to it. I mean, we hear everything about Patty working for the Israeli bank. We're hearing everything what's going on there. I hate to say this, but he doesn't want this thing to end. The minute this whole thing comes to a close, he's voted out.
How does it come to a close?
I-
What kind of close can you
Well-
possibly envision?
I mean, obviously there are still hostages to be exchanged. There's still some sort of negotiations regarding Gaza. There was no way in the world that, in my opinion, Netanyahu was going to bomb the oil fields, because I think that would have forced his allies to pull back on him. You tell him don't do that. He's not, and he goes ahead and does it. He's going to lose any kind of backing he has.
Depends on who gets elected.
Well,
Trump would back him.
if we got a minute, who do you think is the better friend? Without political, who do you think is the better friend, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris of
Trump,
Israel?
no doubt.
And I've spoken to friends of mine who are Democrats who tell me that I'm crazy when I tell them that. I said, the one thing that I look at is, who's, if Kamala Harris gets elected, is she going to leave Israel? I mean, is she going to just let them go? I don't know. Maybe she isn't. But you wouldn't believe how argumentative some of my liberal friends are, that she is, in fact, a better friend of Israel than Donald Trump is. I don't see it.
I can't see it either.
I don't see it.
I just had breakfast with 5 other guys, all of them Jewish. I'm the token goy in the group. And I raised this point. I said, look, I know a guy. He's the son of camp survivors, and he's all for Harris. And he started to tell me about how morally bankrupt Trump was, and he's a convicted felon. He went through the whole 9 yards, attitude towards women, everything. And I said, what do you think about the policy towards Israel? Now, this is the son of a camp survivor, and he's ready to discard Trump, who is clearly, I think, a friend of Israel. So I raised this point at breakfast about a couple hours ago. And my friend said, well, look at Moses. 80% of the Jews didn't follow Moses. There's a guy who destroyed Egypt. He said, that's the way we are as a people.
You know, I, I guess we talked about the both of them. I think the one thing that hurts Donald Trump more than anything, and I say this almost in I feel bad for him. You would think in 2024, after having been elected in 2016 and everything else that's gone on, he would have learned somewhat how to become a politician. He never did. I mean,
That's a strength. That's a
I still
strength.
believe that the producer of The Apprentice, Mark, whatever his name was, uh, I still think he said to Donald Trump in 2014, "I got a great idea for a TV show. Why don't you run for president? We'll film everything, we'll do everything. You're not going to make it, and then once whoever gets elected, we'll show how I tried to be president. That'll be the TV show. It'll make great news." And then all of a sudden, in 2016 in November, Patty went to sleep and Hillary Clinton was winning. I went to bed about 1:30, and she says, "Are you okay?" I says, "He won." And she went, "What?" I said, "Yeah, the television show's out the window because he's the president now."
That's a
And
very
I
good
really
point.
believe that.
Yeah, it's a good
But then
theory.
again, stop and think about this. How many years? I mean, we're all older. We've all voted in numerous elections. In 2016, did you vote for Donald Trump or did you vote against Hillary Clinton? In
Absolutely.
2020, did you vote against Donald Trump or for Joe Biden?
I'll go one step farther. I mean, Bush, um, Obama was a reaction to Bush, and Trump was a reaction to Obama.
Well, if you want to go back, and again, when you sit around here in the quiet of Tennessee and you start to think about things and your mind goes crazy, think about John McCain. All right, go back and think about John McCain. And somebody said to him, "Why don't you pick this woman governor from Alaska, Sarah Palin? She's going to help your thing." And instead of if he would have just turned around and said, "You know what? I'm sure she makes an excellent governor, but if I'm going to pick a female for my running mate, it's going to be Condoleezza Rice."
Yeah,
Think
sure.
about that. Is there any chance in the world that Barack Obama would have beaten John McCain if Condoleezza Rice was his running mate?
McCain was not strong. I think he would have won anyway. But let
You
me
would
ask you a
have, then
question.
you would have had 8 years of McCain, and now he would have been finishing the 8 years of Rice.
It
I
goes
want to
back
ask you
to
one question.
Chris,
Go ahead,
Chris
Freddie.
Rock, when Chris Rock would talk about John McCain, is you guys think John McCain's a politician? You think he's real? He lost to Barack Hussein Obama.
Maddie, I'm going to ask you a question just to end this. You're in
Okay.
Tennessee. If a couple get divorced in Tennessee, are they still brother and sister?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'll fight that to the day my dying day.
Good to see
All
you.
right, guys.
Hey,
Listen,
this
thanks
was
for
great.
everything.
Thanks, Al, for having me
Take
on.
care. All right, guys.
Bye bye.